All right, so we are talking about men's mental health today. This is a topic that is very, very important. It is probably not talked about often, although I am happy to know and happy to hear that it is being talked about more often now than it was when I first started practicing. So we're going to talk a little bit about the prevalence of mental health issues. And I just want to talk a little bit generally and then specifically about what men go through. A lot of these statistics are not from the Middle East. They're from Europe, the UK, US, because that's where a majority of the research and the data is being collected. But from my experience of being in the UAE for the last 14 years and working, like I said, primarily with men in the last 8, and also working in the corporate sector, in professional services firms, etc., where majority of the people, especially in the a majority of the people are men that I have encountered. I would say that a lot of these statistics would hold here as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the prevalence of mental health issues. I want to talk about unique challenges men face. And then I want to deep dive into depression and anxiety. I'm going to do this really quickly. And then talking, how do you support someone, specifically men who are struggling with their mental health? Now, a lot of this information can also be generalized for women, and I will highlight where I'm specifically talking about men, okay? Or I shouldn't say specifically talking about men, but where it might need to be tweaked a little bit, or it might present itself differently. In men, that's where I will mention that. So let's just jump right into it. These are general statistics. 1 out of 4 people in the world right now are struggling with a mental health condition. This is men and women combined. Mental illnesses do not discriminate, age, gender, religion, race, doesn't matter where you come from. It is a global phenomenon right now, and there are many, many, many people that are suffering. Every 40 seconds, someone dies by suicide around the world, and majority of those people who complete suicide are men. Depression is the second most common condition. Take all the diseases in the world, and you will have a mental health condition like depression being the most common. And it is the leading cause of disability worldwide. Now, I do want to clarify here that I will be speaking about mental health conditions, mental illnesses, and then there's difficulties with mental health. These all sort of fall within a spectrum. The most common mental health conditions are depression and anxiety, and these are highly treatable. But there are some mental illnesses such as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, dementias that are, you can treat them, but these are lifelong illnesses. So I'm differentiating between mental health condition and mental illness, because oftentimes when I say, oh, depression is a mental illness, I have seen that most people will reject that with a force that I am not mentally ill. And it actually doesn't resonate. I've had depression and I didn't feel ill. I just felt depressed, and it felt like a condition, but it didn't feel like an illness. I was still walking about. I was still with my children. I was still seeing my friends. There were all these, things happening. And a lot of times it is high functioning depression or high functioning anxiety that people might be struggling with. And so that term mental illness does not resonate with people. So I will use the word mental health condition most often, because depression and anxiety are the most common disorders or conditions out there that are for the that fall within the mental health space. So I wanted to differentiate that for people. I'll go into that a little bit more. Now let's talk specifically about men's mental health. Now, mental illnesses or mental health difficulties or mental health conditions are underdiagnosed in men. Men are less likely to report a mental health condition, they will talk about all sorts of issues when it comes to their physical health, and they're even a little bit hesitant to go to the doctor when it comes to their physical symptoms, but they are very unlikely to go to the doctor. And this is what they found in the Men's Health Forum, that when they asked the men about would they go to the doctor, they did say that they would take time off for physical symptoms such as blood in stools or urine or unexpected lumps in chest, these types of issues, that they would go to the doctor and they would take time off of work. But only 19% would go if they had anxiety, and only 15% would go if they felt low, such as depressive symptoms. So men are less likely to have a diagnosis that is the common illnesses such as depression and anxiety, but they're 4 times more likely to end their life by suicide. So when these numbers, when we look at the numbers of prevalence of mental health conditions or mental health disorders in men, the numbers are always going to be lower in men. They're always going to say women have higher rates, but then we see that suicide by far 4 times more likely to end their life. So we just have to hold that a little bit, that men would rather die than to say that they're struggling with a mental health condition. And many men often even fail to recognize the warning signs, and they may not be able to, or unwilling to, due to stigma, be actually go and seek support. And we'll talk about that. So that is what's happening when it comes to just the diagnoses. So I know that, well, people will say, well, then women actually have higher rates, and not really. I think everyone is suffering, and we can be sure of that. Men are on average dying 8 years before women. They're 4 times more likely to be substance abusers. They report significantly lower life satisfaction, 11 times more likely to spend time in jail. They're more likely to be rough sleepers. They have lower access to social support of friends, relatives, and communities. And in childhood studies, they found that most studies reported, and this is from the World Health Organization, that most studies reported a higher prevalence of conduct disorders like aggressive disorders or antisocial behaviors in boys, where girls, like especially adolescent girls, had more issues of depression and eating disorders and suicide attempts, and adolescent boys had more issues with anger, high-risk behaviors, and they were more likely to complete and commit the suicide more frequently than girls. So in general, adolescent girls are more likely to show symptoms that are inwardly, that are directed inwardly, and boys are more likely to act out their pain. And I think this is, once you learn about trauma and you become trauma informed, and you realize that trauma just shows up differently in boys or in girls, and how they might enact that or act that out would be different in girls versus boys. And depression and anxiety would show up more often in women, but substance use and antisocial behaviors, aggression, rage, violent behaviors show up more likely in men. So when you hold that, then you know that there is a mental health crisis here. So it's how these things are being played out, and how trauma is actually playing out for men and women differently, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist for men. A majority of the men do not seek support. So only 38%, and this is coming out of the NHS, and I would say the numbers are quite similar here, although I am seeing a difference here. But if I were to take the LightHouse's numbers, and we are one of the largest practices in the region, I would say that the numbers are probably quite similar, where men are less likely to reach out for talk therapy, and the numbers we don't have for suicide here, but 78% of the deaths are by suicide that are completed are by men. It is considered the silent epidemic, which is suicide. Suicide is the leading cause of death in males ages 45 to plus 45, and it's the 7th leading cause of death for males worldwide. That's a pretty scary statistic. And I actually don't know what the statistics are post-COVID, post-pandemic. And when they are released, we will know. But I know that in the European Union, young men, I think ages 15 to 24, it is one of the leading cause of death is suicide. And so it's quite serious how much men are hurting, and how, across the world, these things are showing up. Russia, South Africa, South Korea, United States, Japan, France, India. These are completed suicides and men versus women. And, James Hollis, the guy I referenced earlier, he talks about, like, I want you to imagine the life of a man. I want you to take, and he was speaking to a group of women, and he said, I want you to take all your friends away from you. I want you to be absolutely silenced by about any emotions. I want you to not have any social support, and then you might know what a man feels like. And that is what majority of the men feel. And there is a lot of cultural stigma that gets in the way of them being able to actually admit that they are struggling and to seek help. And stigma is one of the biggest barriers for seeking help. And number one illness, take all the illnesses in the world, and HIVs and cancers and all the things that were highly stigmatized at one point to talk about, like cancer, just even a few years ago, a few decades ago, was actually very, very stigmatized. But now we have billboards of breast cancer, and we're saying that we need to talk more about this so we can prevent it and catch it early and treat it. So we are now breaking down the stigma of things like cancer, but we still haven't really done that kind of work when it comes to mental health. And 1 out of 2 people right now are currently afraid of someone with a mental health condition. They don't understand it. They don't want to know about it. They don't know how to talk about it. 4 out of 5 say it's harder to admit that they have a mental health condition than any other condition. Or I will admit to anything, but don't make me admit that I have some sort of mental health condition. And the review of stigma shows that the public may accept that there's a medical or genetic component to it, but people still have a negative view of those with mental health conditions. And stigma is reinforced through public stigma and then internalized self-stigma, as well as institutional stigma. So it's not just one stigma that we're combating here. We have to come at all of them. But the self-stigma for men actually is really quite big. And that is because of this idea of masculinity taken all the way to the edge, which then becomes, it's a patriarchal, I don't want to use this word toxic, but it's where anything that might be related to emotion or support or, emotion or support would be thrown into the feminine, and all that is reinforced is the masculine. And that's when things become unbalanced, where we are supposed to be balanced, and men and women both have a masculine function and a feminine function. And if we were to just bring both of those out, we would be more balanced as human beings. But societal expectations and patriarchal expectations, when just reinforced for what might be your natural inclination, when they say, well, then just do that, and negate or dismiss or deny anything that is not that, that's when it becomes toxic. So masculinity is amazing. Femininity is amazing, and both men and women have both of these functions inside of them, and our aim is to integrate, our aim is to balance, but that is just not what society actually reinforces. And I will say that even now, I am raising 2 teen boys right now, and I remember a time when we went in and there was like we did a group at the Lighthouse, and I sent them to it. It was like an emotional coaching type of group, and boys and girls were there. And I remember the facilitator said, you know, what do you think about crying? And or who here cries? And, you know, my boys raised their hand, and I was sort of watching them from the back, but none of the other boys raised their hand. And then I saw my boys sort of looking around and then putting their hands down as if like, oh, well, maybe I'm not supposed to cry. But that messaging is now being reinforced on playgrounds. It's reinforced on television. It's reinforced through parenting. It's reinforced through institutions. And so this is what the messaging is: to be a man. No one has to tell you what that means. If I say, you know what, you need to be a man, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because that is what is expected. And it is such a narrow definition for men. Be strong, be tough, be stoic, man up. Aggressiveness is very much okay. Crying, definitely not okay. Feelings therapy, that's for women, girls, like it's not what we do. Vulnerability is a weakness. We're changing the language here a little bit, but still, no matter what we are talking about, the doing is not happening. The doing of saying, I struggle, is so hard for men. And it's very hard for men in this part of the world. There's a whole other layer in this part of the world, whether it's South Asian, Asian, Middle Eastern men have a whole other layer of these kinds of expectations. Asking for help is considered a weakness. You don't want to burden anybody. Emotions are generally seen as a weakness, which is really, if I speak from a Jungian space, which is a school of thought in psychology, there's a feminine function and a masculine function. There's a thinking function and there is a feeling function. And so anything related to the thinking will do, but anything related to the feeling, we will deny. And this is the messaging that most men get. And so in so many surveys and, subjective and qualitative kind of work, these are things that men have said. I've learned to live with it. This is just how it is. I don't want to burden anyone. These are things I've heard. I'm too embarrassed. There's a stigma. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to admit that I need support. I have no one to talk to. Are you married? Yeah. Do you have friends? Yeah. Do you have male friends? Yes. Okay. Do you have brothers? Yes. Do you have a father? Yes. Do you have a mother? Yes. I have no one to talk to. No one can tolerate when I am not well. Everyone starts to spiral out of control when I say I need help. It makes everyone destabilized because I am supposed to be the strong one. I am the anchor. And so when I am not well, everything around me starts to fall apart if I admit it. So no one in my life actually knows that I'm coming to see you as a therapist. So this is a secret. I don't tell anyone about it. Mostly I hear, come on, man, you just need a drink. Women want a tough guy. They don't want a guy who has feelings, but they also want to talk about their feelings, but they don't want a guy who has their own set of feelings. And men don't get depressed. This is what we do. Now, Gabor Mate speaks a lot about trauma. Gabor Mate is also a male, and he talked about how he coped with his trauma and his experience of, an emotional life that was cut off from him. And that was through workaholism. That's what he did. He threw himself into work, and that's how he numbed his pain. And his quote is, the essence of trauma is a loss of contact with yourself, a loss of connection to yourself. Now, if we think about all of this stuff that most men are struggling with, the feminine, the feeling, the talking, all of this stuff about emotions, all of that is split off from them. That is literally the definition of trauma. And a lot of men are walking around with a whole lot of trauma. And that's why the numbers that I presented to you earlier about completion of suicide and about being imprisoned, about aggression, about higher rates of conduct disorder, of antisocial disorder, it's got to act out. And if you have any understanding of trauma, you know that a lot of that underneath that is a lot of trauma. And unique challenges expressed by men here. Very, very narrow roles for men. Now, I know women, I'm a woman, and my whole life I've been fighting for women's rights and women's women's movements and things of that sort. And then I started working with men, and I saw how narrowly sort of scoped their lives are when it comes to just the expectations that are of them. So while women have restrictive roles, men also have very restrictive roles. Procreate, produce, protect, and power. These are the 4 words as per James Hollis, which I really feel like captures the essence of what men struggle with, are these 4 words. That's it. You are only allowed to do these 4 things. And that's why there is so much pressure and so much pain that builds up inside of them. And men are generally silenced. And their whole measurehood of manhood is defined by productivity. That's it. No emotional life. From a very early age, they are taught no words for emotions. They're sad, mad, happy. That's it. Like, they don't have an emotional vocabulary. They don't have a space to talk about their emotions. They don't have anybody validating their emotions. They're told to man up or be stoic or be tough or don't be a sissy or any of these things. So that's what they're told their whole life. And then they're supposed to get married and then know how to relate to their partner or relate to their children, which they don't have space for, but still go and produce and product and do all the things that we need from you, man. And then he retires at 65, and he's now supposed to be in touch with his soul. Like, it doesn't work. You've had a whole life of conditioning. And then you reach your 40s, and then you're like, well, what am I supposed to do now? 50s, what am I supposed to do now? When the emotional life calls, they actually don't know what to do with it. And that's where I do believe this, suicide completion at the 45, 50, it's because all my life I've been defined by my productivity, and now I am headed towards retirement. What will I do with my life when I retire? What am I supposed to do? I don't have a relationship that is an emotional attached relationship with the people in my life or anyone. And it has been only defined by my work. And so men are really alienated from each other. They're alienated from themselves, and they turn their rage onto each other. They turn their rage onto themselves. And that is the saddest part of it all, is that men are really hurting. And if they are hurting others, it's because they are also hurting. And I am not condoning any aggression here. I am just saying, I get it. I understand that they are hurting and that there is very little space for them. And I, as a mother of 2 boys, I, as a wife, I, as a daughter, I make space. I make an intention to say, well, that's really hard, and I'm going to be with you through this. And it is a very human experience that you feel sad when something sad happens. I remember my son, he was playing football, and it was a game that he really, really had invested a lot of time and energy sort of prepping for. The team lost, and he was crying. And his coach said, come on, man, don't cry. Like, it's fine. Now, what do you mean don't cry? I said to him, Isa, cry, because this means something to you. And when you cry, it shows you that it means something to you. You gave it everything you had, and now you're hurting because you lost. And it is a very normal human experience to have that experience. And I just had to say it. And I let space, and I let him cry. And then He stopped crying and he was back out on the field the next day. Like, there is no space for those types of things, not with coaches, not with teachers, not with parents, not with siblings, not with friends. There is no space for men. And all there is competition and power. And underneath that is a lot of fear for men. Men live in fear. That's a lot of a fear of just their emotional life, a fear of not knowing when things might show up, and then they feel really out of control. And men would rather have illness, or men would rather die than to admit that they are incapable of dealing with this particular issue that they are confronted with, and that they need support, that I cannot do this alone and I need support. They would rather die, and this is what the suicide rates are showing, than to actually say that I need support. Now that's like, you know, for me, it makes me really, really sad that we're still there. It's still there. Yeah, and they, you know, and one of the things that is so needed, yes, as a woman, we can, you know, as women, we can support the men in our life by creating space and not becoming undone when they cry. Oh, don't cry, don't cry. Don't say things like this. Cry, it's okay, I'm here. That's all you have to say. And that's it. They know they have to do what they have to do. They know what they need to do. But really, that's kind of silencing that is happening from men and women. We need to sort of break down, because that is where the shame then becomes internalized. And because they have so much shame about their emotional life, or because they might need support, which is just crazy as human beings, because you have needs does not make you dependent. Because you have needs makes you human. But that is not part of their repertoire. Because they have so much shame, their wounding that they experience, the trauma that they experience, cannot be transformative. Because in order for us to transform anything into wisdom, into compassion, into love, into anything, we need to actually bring it out into the light. This is the work of alchemy, right? Alchemy of emotions. But you can't transform anything, because shame is like an iron vault, and anything that is covered by shame is not going to be accessible. And shame, what shows up is anger. On the outward, all you will see is anger. And one of the things that is really needed for men is a brotherhood, because as women we can support them, but really this kind of competition, dog eat dog kind of world is really one of the reasons why men have a hard time just speaking up about some of these issues, is because when they do, they're seen as weak by their fellow men. And that's why there's no space. So as women, we can create all that space, but men need to be accepted by men. And they need to be having, you know, these kind of figures, mentors that are men that are saying, I'm with you, and we all go through this. This is a quote, and I'm not sure where I read it, but it captures it pretty well. It's an emotion. It's an emotional movement, a releasing of the pain and the poison men have been holding in their collective stomachs for centuries. It is not power-oriented in any way, but powerful in that it frees men and their spirits from the tyranny of the old paradigm of don't feel, die younger than women, don't talk, don't grieve, don't get angry, don't rock the boat, don't trust other men, don't put passion before bill paying, follow the crowd, not the bliss. This is the paradigm that we're trying to break down. This is where we are coming into balance. This is when we accept all parts of us. Call it whatever you want, yin, yang, estrogen, testosterone, feminine, masculine, call it whatever you want. But this is about owning all the different parts of us and saying they all need an expression, they all need a voice. So this is the movement that we hope that by having such talks and by having men's groups and by having men talk about their own mental health, that we break this down. This is not about men being on, at the top or women being at the top. No, we are codependent. We need each other. We need to support each other. We are, where one might need support, the other might be able to lean in. And so it really is an interdependence, which has now become quite competitive. And it's, again, isolating and breaking things down into their own separate corners, which is just, again, not very helpful. So what is mental health? What is a mental health condition? I'm going to move through this part very quickly. So let's talk about mental health. What is mental health? Well, mental health is like physical health. Everyone that has a mind and a body has mental health and physical health. Anyone that has a body is going to have mental health. So mental health is not just related to your brain. Mental health is all things associated with this holistic system that plays with each other. There is a field in psychology called psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology. No, psychoneuroendoimmunology, whatever, the same systems, which is psychology, neurology, endocrinology, and immunology. They all link up with each other, which is basically we are one system and everything affects everything. And so mental health is something we all have, something we all have to take care of. It's important to your overall health. It's your mind, your thoughts, your feelings, your body. It's on a continuum and it is flexible. It's not something crazy weak people have. It's not something that exists only in our brain or in our mind. It's not about feeling good all the time, and it is not a fixed state. So when we think about mental health, so this is, defined by World Health Organization, and I actually really like this definition. It's about someone who realizes their potential. They can cope with their life stress. They can work productively, and they're able to contribute to their community in some way. So this is what a state of well-being looks like in people. Can you cope with what life is throwing in your direction? And most of us right now are really struggling because life is throwing at us all sorts of things that we just feel overwhelmed by. And when your resources are overwhelmed by your stressors, this is where we become unwell. This is where dis-ease comes in, where our resources are overwhelmed by our challenges. We are now compromised. So if we look at mental health on a continuum, think about good mental health and poor mental health. Just because you have poor mental health does not mean you have a mental health condition or a mental illness. Now, let me give you an example here. Now, there are days where, weeks, where I am meditating and I am exercising and I'm sleeping and I'm seeing my therapist and I'm journaling and I'm breathing and I'm being in touch with nature, all the things that are very good for my mental health. I'm socializing, I'm connecting with the people in my life. Good mental health. I'm feeling good. Now, all of a sudden, a stressor comes. Maybe there was some, bad news in my family, or maybe there was a job stressor, or maybe something happens with one of my kids or something. And all of a sudden, oh, I'm not sleeping properly. And you know what? Exercise, I don't have the energy for it. I don't want to do this right now. I start eating, more of those burgers rather than, of the earth. And all of a sudden I start to slide down into the poor mental health space. Now, before I get into even the poor mental health space, I might be compromised mental health. And usually I will do is I'll try to catch myself here. But then there are times where I've let it really go and I'm now in poor mental health. I still don't have a diagnosable depression or anxiety or substance use or any of these disorders, okay? So you can have poor mental health and still be functioning. You can have a mental health condition and still be day-to-day work, life, all of that stuff. Now, with poor mental health, it's easier for me to pull it back into good mental health. When I stay in a space of poor mental health for too long, and I'm not saying months, I'm talking weeks, If I stay in that space without catching myself and saying, you know what, come on, you gotta get your sleep in order, or come on, you've got to start moving again. If I stay in that space for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, now I have something called a mental health diagnosis or a mental illness, whichever word you like to use. Now, a mental health condition is something that causes major changes to your feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. It's persistent over time, more likely 2 weeks or more. It impairs your functioning, meaning you are now socially withdrawing, you're not able to perform professionally, you're not able to tend to the things that you used to tend to in the same kind of way. It is now interrupting your life. So it's actually clinically significant impairment in your day-to-day functioning. That is one of the criteria of most diagnoses. Now, the two that I'm going, actually, no, let's talk about this. When we think about mental health conditions, we think they all look like this. And there are some that do look like this. If we're talking about severe depression or substance use or, bipolar or schizophrenia, there are diagnoses that actually could put you in a very deep despair. Major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, these clinical symptoms, they could look like this, but then they also look like this. So I think when we think about, well, this is why I'm saying mental health condition, mental illness, mental health condition, mental illness, because there are days you might feel like this, but then most days you might feel like this. Most days you would be able to show up to the world. You might be able to give your speeches, and you might be able to make public appearances, and you might be able to show up on set, and you might be able to, be super creative, show up to the Olympics, whatever it is, but you still show up to the world. It's just that, inside you are really suffering. And most men are suffering in silence, and they're suffering from isolation, loneliness, because their true self is not seen by anyone, because there's no space for that. So they're not always visible, and that's something we should know. Anxiety can, and you can still be confident, suicidal and still work fine. Anthony Bourdain, before he committed suicide, that he was on set. When we talk about, Robin Williams, he's funny, and he's, people that are influencers that have taken, have completed suicide. These people were showing up in front of the camera, and they were laughing and joking and being engaged with whatever it is that they were doing, but then they ended up taking their life. So it is something that you don't see. You just don't see it. And I think most often, what people will get when someone completes suicide, especially men, they will say, oh, but everything seemed so fine. He just seemed so good. Like he was just over, he was joking, he was laughing. That's usually how it shows up. And it's not always visible. Sometimes it is visible, and some parts of it might be visible, but it's not always visible. So there's many people, many factors that put people at risk for a mental health condition. So physical, so it's like a biopsychosocial lifestyle type of thing, okay? So biologically, having chronic illnesses or vitamin D deficiency, side effects of medication, family history, psychological factors, low self-esteem, being super self-critical, pessimistic, comparing yourself to others, having a family history of mental illness or trauma or abuse. Now, when we say psychological, because you had a family member, and because of that, your needs were not met. So that could be, a lot of people with parents who had personality disorders, or mothers and fathers who had substance use or depression or anxiety, that could have psychologically had an impact on you, and it could have been experienced as trauma or neglect. Social risk factors, pandemic, being an expat, loneliness, bullying, discrimination, unstable war environment, regions that you might be living in, a high stress environment. So like workplaces that are very high stress, a lot of professional services firms will be, long hours, different time zones. I think living in Dubai, where we're tending to the West and the East, and we're happen to be in the middle, our sleep patterns are really messed up. A lot of people travel out of Dubai. Some of that settled down during the pandemic, but it's back full swing now. And so this kind of high stress, high pressure stuff can take a toll on your physical health, which then eventually will compromise your mental health. Things like big life changes and transitions, men tend to not do very well when it comes to things like a death of a loved one or divorce. They really bottle things up and they numb things out. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then all of these things, substance abuse, no rest, lack of exercise, poor sleeping patterns, replacing in-person, things with this kind of transactional way of doing things on Zoom. Like, we need each other, guys. We need to be in each other's space, but we've just become quite functional and transactional. And that actually increases the loneliness, then increases the mental health impact. And, the Surgeon General of the US talks about loneliness being an epidemic. And this was pre-COVID, by the way. So this is not because of COVID, but obviously exacerbated by COVID. And now we feel even lonelier because we just sit at our desk, we just work on Zoom, and we're not engaging with each other. And we forgot how important that is for us. So let's take a closer look at depression and anxiety. Really quickly, clinical depression, sadness, normal. Clinical depression, this is now in the clinical serious range. Sadness, you're still able to go through the day-to-day. It lasts a few days. It's usually a result of something that has happened, and it's temporary. And you're still able to sort of enjoy things. Now, it's a very normal thing to be sad in life when something sad happens, such as my son who lost his game. He was sad. He might even be sad for 3-4 days after, but he's still able to go to school. He's still able to hang out with us. He's still able to confide in me. He's still able to engage with me. All of that was still happening, but he was just really sad about not doing well in that particular thing. So that would be sort of very, it's a very normal thing. Now, depression is something that is more clinical, and it lasts for 2 weeks or more often than not. And it has significant impact on your functioning. We say 2 weeks, but most people don't come to us at the 2-week mark. Most people will have been feeling like this for months before they even come in. And when I say, okay, well, how long have you been feeling this way? And they'll be like, yeah, I don't know, probably since April. Okay, so finally they're like, okay, I can't. So I don't see anyone looking at their clock and saying, well, I've lost pleasure in all activities for 2 weeks. I'm going to go see. It'd be great if they did, but it's not happening that way. There's a loss in energy, a fatigue, a difficulty concentrating, difficulty making decisions, changes in your sleep, changes in your appetite, and feeling worthless or guilty. This is for 2 weeks or not, more often than not, all day that you are experiencing this. So it's not that you only feel it at work and then at home you're good. No, this is pervasive. It is in all areas of your life. It carries with you. It is something internal rather than you reacting to an external stimuli. Okay. So, but men also really, the things that we might notice in men, which is not part of the official diagnostic criteria, depression shows up a little bit differently in men than it would in women. So women might be tearful a lot more. And I'm now just speaking very, very generally here. I've seen women engage in these activities as well, but I'm saying generally speaking, men will not go to the doctor and say, I am having low energy and I don't enjoy the things I used to. They will not say that, but they will get picked up on, well, he's drinking a lot more, he's gambling a lot more, he's engaging in a lot of things like video games or high risk behaviors or overworking and not resting, starting to avoid family. It's finding it hard to keep up with family responsibilities. vulnerabilities. They become a little bit more controlling or even abusive in relationships. And they start thinking about death a lot more. And so thinking about death a lot more happens for women as well. Like, I can't live like this anymore. I don't want to live like this anymore. So it's not that you're going to be thinking about suicide, but you're just thinking this kind of suicidal ideation about, well, I wish I wasn't alive. I wish I wasn't going through this, is what they're saying. But just life feels very, very dark at that time. And so what men will engage in is self-medication and self-numbing behaviors a lot more than women. Is because women have a little bit more space to talk about some of these things that they're going through. They can call their friend, they can call their sister, they can call someone and say, yeah, I'm not really feeling well. Men don't have that space. So that kind of pain, it's really, really like a physical symptom that they might experience. And then to relax that or take the edge off, they will start drinking, and then they might start, doing other things to just take the edge off. Clinical anxiety, again, there's healthy worry, then there's clinical anxiety. Healthy worry, normal. I can do a whole other talk for you guys on anxiety, but it's a normal thing. It's usually triggered by an event, it's temporary, and there's minor changes. Like right before I go and do a talk, I will have a little bit of, am I ready? Did I get it all right? Did I, do I have all the research? And I will have this kind of worry. Healthy, it's adaptive, it helps me prepare. Clinical anxiety is now, it's actually causing me to not even show up for the work, right? It's actually not necessarily even triggered by an event. Now it's just a physical symptom that I'm experiencing all the time. And it is a clinical and serious condition. You could have suicidal thoughts or behaviors as a result of it. And it's severe and it's long lasting. And some of the signs and symptoms really, really change the way you even process and behave. And it can be felt in the physical body. A mild anxiety is vague, but severe anxiety is really like, people will go to the ER and they will say, I'm having a heart attack. And they will say, no, you're not having a heart attack. You need to go see a psychologist because that's anxiety. So this kind of tightness and pain in the chest and dizziness, headaches, physical body aches. A lot of men will go to the doctor for this. They will actually say, oh, I have digestive issues, I have headaches, I have body aches, my back hurts, my shoulder hurts, let me go to the physio, let me go to, and they will actually not say, I need a psychologist. Psychologist will be the last person that they will see, but they will go through every medical doctor out there, but they will not see a psychologist. Psychologically, indecisive, irritable, angry, confusion, just not being able to think clearly, just kind of worried all the time about everything. One worry leads to another worry, which leads to another worry. I'm worried about money, but how will I pay for my parents? And how will I take care of my daughter's education? And, what if my car breaks down? And it's just like a spiral. And they starts to go into this kind of mind racing where the mind might actually go blank. And then behaviorally, they just start to avoid things. They're like, I don't want to go to that meeting. I don't want to go to that work. I don't want to go see those people. I don't want to have those conversations. Or they might not even start looking at their bank account because it just triggers them into a spiral of very anxious feelings. And escape behaviors are also part of anxiety. Just get me out of here, man. I don't want to think anymore. I don't want to feel this anymore. That's what most men will do. And a lot of what I see here on the weekends is this kind of binge drinking, and this just like, it's not normal. That is not normal. It is unhealthy, it is not normal, and is not helping your mental health. Because you might think that you just are drinking on Saturday and recovering on Sunday. No, the body takes a whole lot longer to recover. And from Saturday to Saturday is not enough time. So that kind of compounds that, that issue of them feeling quite compromised mentally and physically, men and women, by the way. And there is a high functioning anxiety. Like I said, I've worked with a lot with professional services, highly successful men, C-suite, and they will be very, very high functioning, but underneath all of that is going to be a lot of anxiety, they feel overwhelmed, they definitely will not be the first people to get help, they will be compromised when it comes to their life satisfaction. But on the outside, that's the guy you go to. He's the one you go to because he's hardworking, he's loyal, he's going to come through, he's going to send you that email even if it's at 2 in the morning. But if you need it done, he's going to be the one to do it. So these guys are especially the ones that you want to worry about, because they are the ones that are going to break down. They're going to keep running and keep running until they literally break down and burn out. And only that burnout is going to be the one that's going to say, oh, okay, I need to do something a little bit differently. Then they will find their rest and they will find their center, and then they will start running again, and then they will have another burnout. Maybe after 2 burnouts, possibly even 3, or a physical disease that is, sort of very difficult to reverse or treat. Only then they might actually say, I think I need to do something about this. So how do you respond to someone? Earlier, the better. The earlier you treat this. So I hope that there are men on this call, and I hope that you were able to see some of this inside of you. And I hope that you're able to say, you know what, I don't want to live like this. I actually would like to talk to someone about this, because if she's telling me that these are highly treatable and I can heal and I actually can be happier and I actually can feel well, I can have energy that I have split off from, I have access to resources that are inside of me, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go talk to someone. Well, the earlier you do it, the better. Less negative impact on your life, longer recovery, self-esteem and motivation that is improved, less likely that any sort of stuff starts to play out at the workplace, and then there's going to be a decreased risk of impairment. When it comes to responding to men, if you see someone struggling, these are the 3 things you need to make sure you do. First, just check in with yourself. Do you even have space to check in with this person? And don't do it at the water cooler, because guess what, guys? 100% of the time, hey, man, how you doing? They're going to say, good. How's your weekend? Good. And off you go. Well, I asked him, he was good, even though I can see that he looks a little bit unkempt, and, that was the same shirt he wore yesterday. And, I can see that something might not be right. I can feel something's not right, but I asked. So don't do it that way. Plan and make a time to meet. And you know what? You might actually have to ask a man several times. And the way you would ask a man is you would highlight an observable behavior. Hey, listen, I've noticed that you've not showed up to some of our meetings. Or, hey, listen, I've noticed that you've been a lot more irritable. What's going on? Rather than, hey, you good? No, you don't want to say you're good, because they're going to say, yes, I'm good. One of the ways that is recommended to work or to talk to men. So if there's a man in your life and you are a man and you want to check in on a man, you might actually go for a walk together. Even as a woman, I as a mom, as a wife, I would say, hey, let's go for a walk. And in that walking, I'm talking with them. This kind of sitting, tell me how you feel. Yeah, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for a lot of men. There are some men who will come into treatment for stress, and that stress or anger management. And from there, we will see a history of a lot of unprocessed grief and trauma and other things that need to be worked through. So doing an activity might be a good way, practicing attuned listening. So you're not like checking your phone or answering your phone, like just really a presence with the other person, because you're co-regulating them with your own energy. And then I know this is really hard to do, guys, because that's just how you guys have been conditioned and trained, but don't solve. And women don't solve for men also. We need to hold the space for some of that emotional stuff to actually come out and say, okay, what else has been going on? How else has this been showing up? What else have you been thinking? What else have you been feeling? What else have you been doing? Like, we just need to hold that space rather than, all right, well, don't worry about it. You can just quit your job. We can move. We don't need to be here. Like, immediately, because we cannot tolerate our own anxiety when we see a man who is struggling with something. Most people can't tolerate their own stuff. So we move into solving. And this goes for moms too, by the way, moms and dads. We don't want to see our kids suffer. So we solve the problem. And then we basically send the signal that there is no space for feeling here. And then you might be able to give them internal and external resources. Now, there are things you don't want to say to someone. Make a note of this. You don't want to say this stuff. It wouldn't be happening to you if you were stronger, man. It's all in your head. Stop being so negative. Come on, you're no fun. Let's go have a drink. You know, you're kind of being ungrateful. Stop being pathetic. You're feeling sorry for yourself, man. Don't feel so sorry for yourself. You know, when I was going through something like this, I didn't feel sorry for myself. Not helpful. You're being dramatic. You're being sensitive. I think you're like faking it. Like, I mean, one day you're fine, the next day you're not. Like, I don't understand this. Men hear this. That's intentional harm, and or not intentional, but it's harmful. And then this is stuff that we say, you know, it's really not that bad. I mean, if you just look on the bright side, be positive, just need to think about it a little bit differently, be grateful for what you have. At least you have a job, you know, at least you have a wife, at least you have a kid. Like, sometimes we say these things and it's like, well, I don't know. I don't feel better now that you've said this. I just feel worse. I feel guiltier. I feel so bad for you. Don't want to say that. Just get on with it, man. Just pull yourself up through the boots and move on out. And if your faith was stronger, you wouldn't feel this way. Now, I am not saying that at some point in that conversation, this might not happen. But if you say it too quickly, you are now dismissing their pain. And I can tell you 100% of the time, if someone comes and says, listen, man, I'm really struggling with work. And you say, come on, man, at least you have a job. That's it. They're not coming back and talking to you again. And I can tell you 100% of the men and the boys that I have worked with and all the teens that I've worked with, why don't you go talk to your parents, or why don't you go talk to your wife, or why don't you go talk to your mom? They will say, well, they don't listen. This is us being dismissive. Okay. So what do you want to say? Or what should you say? I should say, first of all, you just got to know that you are the biggest vehicle here. Your nervous system, your ability to just stay present with them is the biggest gift you can give them. You listening to them is the biggest form of generosity in this space. So it really is going to just questions. Tell me, what's it been like for you? How long have you been feeling this way? What do you mean by that? Explain more to me. What can I do to help? What can I take off your plate? What have you been doing to care for yourself? This is really important. This sounds really difficult. I can't imagine what it's been like for you. I'm here though. I'm here to listen. Thank you for opening up to me. Thank you for your trust. I don't even know what to say, but I'm here. I'm glad to be with you. So sometimes you just don't know what to say. Don't just say, I don't know what to say. I'm here though. We're going to get through this. I'm going to be right next to you as you get through this. And mental health is just as important as physical health. And don't apologize. I'm here. And that's a lot that you're going through. And I'm going to be with you every step of the way. That's it. And I know we're at the hour, guys. And the last thing I will say is that if you guys really don't know what to say, I really urge you to become a mental health first aider, which is basically the same thing as mental health, as physical first aid, but for mental health. It's a 10-hour course. It's evidence-based. It's out of Australia. It's in 23 countries. The LightHouse is the sole licensed provider in the UAE, and it really teaches you how to sensitively talk to someone who is struggling with their mental health. Men, women, both. Okay. So you learn to detect the signs, you learn how to respond, and then you learn how to get them to the help they need locally. So a lot of times people are like, oh, well, I took mental health first aid in the UK. The UK has very different resources than the UAE. The hotlines and inpatient and what are the legal, the legalities of certain issues like drinking and, you know, things like that needs to be sort of talked about in a culturally sensitive way. And so the UAE has mental health first aid that is very specific to the country and the resources that are here. And that's all I have for you guys. Now I'm going to answer some questions. I do realize some of you have to drop off. These are my two I'm on Instagram and I'm on LinkedIn. LightHouse also has all of these social media channels, including a YouTube channel. I also have a YouTube channel, but some of these talks will be on the LightHouse's account. For parents, these are the two. And then for the youth, these are the two. Now let's take some questions. All right, here we go. How do you enroll in the mental health first aid course? If you go on our website, you will see an events section. The events section will have the calendar for mental health first aid. And I think it will even have an informational session if you want to know more about it. It's like a 30-minute session that you can do. But these are online courses. They're done live. A lot of role play, so you get to practice a lot. And then you have access to free once-a-month support sessions for mental health first aiders. So I really recommend doing that if you guys are interested. We also have one for mental health first aid for adolescent, meaning if you are a parent of an adolescent, then you would take that course, because talking to kids is a little bit different than talking to an adult. And if you have a teen, then you also have teen to teen mental health first aid, which is you train your teens to deal with each other in a sensitive way when it comes to this stuff. So usually doctors ask you how you are feeling and you can't really explain it. Is there a way to test my mental health before going to a doctor? Well, we do emotional well-being checks at the LightHouse. So you can just call and say, I'd like to book an emotional well-being check. It's a 30-minute appointment, which you can do. And we go through the different parts of your life, and we have you rate different parts of your life, and we really just say, how are you doing and how are you feeling in that space? So it gives you a little bit of language and a little bit of a frame on how to talk about your mental health. So that is one thing that I could recommend. So try that first. Let's see. Let's see, I'm now reading another question, guys. I'm not zoning out. So how do I know if what I am feeling at the moment is symptoms of depression or anxiety? For example, most weekends, I don't feel like going out, locking myself in my room, binge watching movies, and will only go out when hungry. You know when something's not right. Don't wait for the full-blown clinical disorder, as I said, okay? If you know that this is not normal, like this is not how you want to live your life, right? It sounds like that. It sounds like, well, I want to be engaged with my community. I want to go out to the beach. I want to be out running and feeling physically in my body. And, I want to be out with my friends. If you know what you want and you're not there, it's time to get support. That's it. Don't worry about depression and don't worry about anxiety. If you are not living the life you want and you don't know how to get yourself out of this kind of stuff that you're in right now, that would be the time to get support so that you can problem solve this even. Maybe it's just habits. Maybe you just need to say, okay, you know what? I'm actually okay. Or you know what? During the week, I'm so exhausted because I'm not sleeping properly. All I want to do is lay in front of me. Okay, now we need to problem solve that week. And so, okay, what are you going to do a little bit differently? And your lifestyle will have a huge impact, guys, on your mental health. What you eat, when you get your sunlight, how much are you moving? I just did a talk for Move for Mental Health, which will be uploaded on our YouTube channel for the LightHouse. Watch it. Exercise is an antidepressant. Exercise is an anti-anxiety. Exercise will help you feel better. So if we know that, then maybe we should just start planning that in and then say, okay, well, what else do I have to do? And what else have I not addressed inside of me? Men, Gabor Mate has a book called When the Body Says No. And he says men die of lung cancer more than women. And it's not like men smoke more than women do, but lung in the Chinese medicine, the lungs hold grief. So many men are grieving grieving the loss of a childhood that was fragmented and split off from themselves, grieving not having a mother or a father that validated their experience, grieving not having a full life that they had access to because they were narrowed into that. What are you going to do? How much are you going to earn? What are you going to, like, grieving? They're just grieving a lot. And so how do we just make space for some of that grief and then tend to that grief so we set ourselves free? That's it. That's the work. So if something doesn't feel right, pick up the phone, make the call. When I say go see a therapist or go see a mental health professional, you're not going to be in therapy for the rest of your life unless you want to be. It is about it's about saying, okay, I'm going to do 3 months of this. You know, all the best players in the world have coaches. These are like Olympians, right? They have coaches. Why? Why do they have coaches? The coach doesn't know how to do it better than them, but the coach can see something that the athlete can't. And this is why I think a lot of these, you know, very successful people will have a therapist, they will have a counselor, they will have a coach, they will have someone that will be able to facilitate an emotional experience for them. Now, the men that I work with, like I said, they're all very, very, very high functioning, super successful men, but they don't have access to some parts of themselves. Now, they could go see their coach, but the coach is only going to solve the problem and they're going to be very future focused. What they have found is that with the coach, they're going to be able to get somewhere when it comes to just a certain part of their life. But the emotional realm, or transforming their trauma or transforming their grief, that is not the realm of the coach. Now, I've studied coaching as well, so I know the realm of coaching and I know the realm of counseling, and that is a little bit different. So this is what we're doing. We're not waiting for a clinical disorder in order for someone to show up. They're just saying, I don't have access to parts of me. I want access to those parts. I know there's something more in me, and I want access to that part. That's why these men are coming in. And then we unleash their superpower, and they have a more balanced way of being, and they're more vulnerable. And so they are more authentic. And so they have more followership. So they have more leadership. And that's how they have more emotional quotient, EQ, because they're able to identify when they're not feeling well and then say, I'm not feeling very good about this. They have access to their intuition because that lives in their body. Most men are cut off from their body and they live up here. And so how do we integrate the mind and the body? I am not saying let's sit here and talk about feelings all day long, guys. Please do not get me wrong. But I am saying, if you are split off and you are fragmented and you are denying a massive part of yourself, it will catch up to you. And midlife is usually when it catches up to men. And midlife is when they start acting out in lots of different ways that are probably not very healthy for them. And they think that that might be the answer. It ain't. I've walked with men through their midlife, and I'm telling you, they'll do everything under the sun. And then they will say, okay, fine, never mind. I now have to take the inner journey, and I have to go back into the pain, and I have to transform that stuff if I'm going to be free. Freedom is not outside. It's not running away from home or quitting your job or leaving your wife or leaving your kid. It's not that. It actually is an internal experience. And that cannot happen unless you go inwards. So most of my work about midlife has been through my experience with working with men. Lots of questions here. So I'm still staying online here with you guys. Unable to see or hear anything. You're on 2 browsers. Why are you running an event with firewalls? Yeah, no, sorry, not doing that. It's going to be recorded. The link will be sent to you. But I'm imagining that if you're here sending me that question, that you probably heard it. Okay. Gentle, gentle. Here we go. I do not agree with the phrase that men should be tuned to their feminine side. There should be no feminine side in men. Men are supposed to be leaders. This is not to discount emotions, but the phrase that men should accept the feminine is bad for society. And so there it is. Now, all human beings have estrogen and testosterone, yin, yang, softness, firmness, flexibility, strength. Call it whatever you want. Collaboration, leadership, right? Whichever way you want to look at it. Group, single-mindedness, like this kind of way of being. We all have everything. The fact that you have such a reaction to the word feminine is probably going to be what I recommend you start with. Because I have worked with men who can say, yeah, there is a function. I am not talking about femininity. A feminine function, mother, complex. Complex being a neutral word, not being a complex, but as a Jungian would say, complex, and a father complex. Feminine, masculine, yin, yang, estrogen, testosterone, call it whatever you want, sky, earth, right? If we look at spiritual practices, they will consider mother earth, father sky. Like, it is the fact that we have opposite polars inside of us. And our job is to hold the tension of the opposite poles and to bring both of them together. As much as men need to lean into their feminine function to be more of who they are, women need to lean into their masculine function and to be more of who they are. So this idea of it is bad for society, yeah, I'm not really sure where you're getting that, but I'm telling you what's bad for society. What is bad for society is men killing themselves every 40 seconds. That's what's bad for society, if you ask me. And majority of the men saying that there's no space for them to talk about their feelings. Yeah, that's probably bad for society too. And 11 times more than women, men being imprisoned. That's probably bad for society too. And men being aggressive and angry and dying of heart disease, that's probably bad for society too. So yeah, I would really ask you to explore that part of yourself that rejects the feminine function, which is different from femininity. Yeah, a lot of things are bad for society. That's probably not at the top of the list. Sorry, guys, I feel very passionately about this. And I've grown up in a macho culture, and I have sons and a husband, and I have been very much affected by patriarchy, and I have had to break those things down. But my stance changed a lot. It softened a lot when I started working with men and I saw their suffering. And I feel absolutely inspired by the men that I have worked with, because they stepped into their courage when they said, I want to own my emotions. And I am telling you, read all the books, do all the research on leadership. The ones that are the most powerful are going to be the most charismatic, are going to be the most authentic, are going to be the ones that have the highest intelligence when it comes to their emotions. Emotional quotient is going to set people apart. What is emotional quotient? It is having access to your emotions, which is generally qualified as the feminine function. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. This all day long. I'm gonna have to cut this thing. I get really, really upset about this. Really. Why is burnout more common in our generation of men compared to older generations? Burnout generally is common in men and women actually have a higher rate of burnout simply, and sort of all the criteria of burnout met. Just we're overworking, we're not resting, we're not, seeing our humanity. Burnout is a very complicated issue, and we hope to do a masterclass on burnout soon, because it isn't as easy as we think it is to understand. So we'll talk about that. So how can we know if the teenage weekend partying, drinking, porn is part of age, or it's something that has to do with stress? Yeah, I would not let a teenager do any of those things. And is this something that can be addressed at school? Not all parents talk about these issues. In some countries, that might be part of something they do in school. And I know in some aspects they do talk about drug abuse and things like that, but no one's talking about just lifestyle, I think, in this kind of way. The teenage brain is highly, highly susceptible to, 50% of all mental health issues get activated by the age of 14, even younger, but definitely by the age of 14. The brain is under massive construction during adolescent years. And you do not want to introduce things like alcohol and porn during that time, because the brain's dopamine levels are also very different during adolescent years. So you do not want to bring in addictive substances around this time, because there's a higher likelihood of them being addicted to such things or something else in the future when you introduce it in adolescence. So that's what I will say about that. Parents need to talk about it. Schools need to talk about it. Therapists need to be talking about it. If you don't know how to talk about it, talk to someone who knows how to talk about it, like a parenting coach. That's what I would say. Yes, the Lighthouse does have one-on-one sessions for people outside of the UAE. We do have online sessions that we do, even for parent coaching, one-on-one therapy. We just, if there is high risk, then we advise that you see someone in your home country. And I am going to stop there. If I didn't answer your question, please send me a message on LinkedIn or on Instagram. I'd be happy to answer it there. Guys, we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of work to do in this space. And it's really sad that people have such, people have such ideas about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. And it's so narrow when we are so much bigger than that. And we are our minds and our feelings and our thoughts and our bodies and our spirituality and our community. Like, we are bigger than this narrow definition of what has been handed to us from generations before. We can question that and we can build upon that, not to negate it. I am not saying that. I'm just saying, let's expand that a little bit so we can be more of who we are, rather than just stay in that narrow definition of those things. And you can continue to protect, and you can continue to provide, and you can continue to do all the things that are associated with the masculine function. And you can also do more. So this is Men's Mental Health, Men's Health Month. And I really hope that you guys take care of yourself, take care of each other, and especially men for men. You guys need each other. And there's something that you can give to each other that women cannot give to men. And I think that vulnerability and that acceptance of, yeah, I struggle, and this is how I cope. And this is how we're gonna, this is when someone dies, this is how I grieve. This, I think talking about it like that, this is what normalizes and destigmatizes. And one day it will be as normal as talking about breast cancer the way we have when it comes to October, and the way we talk about it, it will be as normal to talk about men's mental health openly. So thanks, guys. I wish you a good week ahead. Take care.